All right, happy Monday, Risers. Because it's a holiday weekend, you have the Rising Fridays crew here with you on Monday. Try not to get too confused. I already am very confused.
I've been wearing the same outfit for 4 days.
Yes.
Actually, I normally do so.
You've got the Christmas tie.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, all right. So happy Monday. We're back with another round of #RisingQs where we answer your questions. Ryan, why don't you start us off with question number 1?
All right, this comes from Cyrus Howell. How do you spend your days looking at the corruption and disingenuousness of politics and maintain any optimism? I have to take breaks to not lose hope. Emily, how do you do it?
I honestly don't. I'm not even making that up. I mean, truly, I have hope, obviously, in faith and in God. I have very little hope that we're heading in a direction that's not darker on a daily basis, just because I think we have unprecedented technologies that are hyper novel and changing our minds in ways, basically rewriting the software of the human mind. So I think things are bleak, but I think you have to find your hope in that's at least for me, in God.
Not for me and God. Viewers know that I love, I spend a lot of time reading history and studying history. And so that's actually related. Like, I think the more you pan back and the more you see humanity striving and overcoming obstacles throughout history, then it can give you a better perspective on your current moment, that this too shall pass. Then you look even closer at the history and you see that maybe it's not actually going in such a great direction. Yeah. But you would think back to how things were 100, 200, 300 years ago, and you can see genuine progress. And you can see people who banded together as communities and as movements to make that progress happen. And that's kind of the way that I keep my head screwed on straight.
We're self-preserving creatures. I mean, that's the way that evolution, that's the way that we're programmed. And so if there's sort of like a scientific source of hope, I think it's that. But I also think some of this hyper-novel technology is basically like numbing us to the will to live. Like it's making it, it's creating all of these new incentives that don't necessarily line up in natural ways with human life. We could do a whole show on this subject, so I won't debate my ideas about technology for this and the answers to this question.
It's bad.
Yeah, it's bad. All right, let's go to the next question. We're starting out here with the federal court ruling the 14th can be used to bar, quote, insurrectionists from holding office. How do Dems legally use against Green and Cawthorn if they're not convicted of insurrection? And if they claim something they did qualifies for insurrection, shouldn't they then get tried for it? What do you think about that, Ryan?
I think yes. I think they should, like, if you're going to apply that piece of the 14th Amendment to lawmakers, then I think that their insurrectionary crimes will have been so great that you can then also prosecute them. And if you can't prosecute them, I think that it doesn't apply. I think that's a very fair point. And I think that now, I think the left, actually more, I call it the center, from back at the time when this 14th Amendment was being implemented, was too weak in quisling on the actual insurrectionists of the day. This was a huge fight over when and how should the senators and members of Congress and other leaders of the Confederacy be allowed to come back into public life. And there were a lot of radical Republicans who said that's an absurd question. Yeah, you're done. Like, you walked out and you launched an actual rebellion. And so forget it. And you had a bunch of the compromisers and the same types of moderates that the Manchin types who were like, no, let's bring them back in and let's try to stitch the country back together. And so you had all these Confederate leaders just waltz back into the Senate and then successfully push their white supremacist agenda. They did not come back in chastened.
And Although that white supremacist agenda was enabled by, I think, a white supremacist mentality that existed even among their opponents at the time. And what's interesting is I completely agree with you. And like the radical Republican position of the day, I feel like is probably where I would have been. But at the same time, when we look back, it is a really challenging question as to whether some of the wounds that actually were healed in real time stemmed in part from that mentality of like, well, we are in the same country, thus there has to be some ability to like sit at a table and talk about policy. I don't know.
Yeah, to me, it wasn't really about that like high-minded level of let's all get together and work our way forward. It was Andrew Johnson becomes president because Lincoln is shot, and Andrew Johnson was a Democrat, a fierce white supremacist, who had this kind of contempt for the white planter class that morphed into this obsequious relationship. Like he wanted to be accepted by them, and so he quickly overdid like the 40 acres and the mule, or that sort of thing, and just welcomed them all back in. Said, Jefferson Davis, you know what? We're not going to try you for this. Ugh. The assassination of Lincoln was a mass conspiracy. It was not just a lone person, and in fact, there were other people shot on that same day, and they were in communication with Richmond. Like there was plenty of evidence to wave Lincoln's bloody shirt around and say, look, not only did they rebel against the country and get put down, they just killed the president. Yeah. And instead of trying that and then carrying out the revolution that the radical Republicans wanted to, they let everybody back into the fold. And I think so that's where that insurrection line comes from. The radical Republicans said, no, you can't. Constitution says we're going to put into the Constitution that you can't come back in. And it shows how much it matters what the text of the Constitution says if you don't have the political and cultural power to enforce it, because even with that in there, they were still allowed back into office. You know you're watching Rising Fridays when a question about Madison Cawthorn and Marjorie Taylor Greene turns into a debate about the 14th Amendment. Well, but I'm not debating you. I think you're right. I don't even think it's like the high-minded question. Yeah, I don't think that's what they were focused on. But in retrospect, it's like, what decisions? But yes, if you want to bar Marjorie Taylor Greene from office, I think you got to charge her with insurrection. Legally, this is going to help at least define insurrection in a more modern, I guess, or applicable, practical way. Yeah. So, and we it looks like we have another rising cue. Why is there no major policy push to give the students the ability to claim bankruptcy on their student debt versus outright canceling it? Wouldn't be a much better sell to the general public. So actually, in the beginning, this was possible. And as student loans started to explode, my understanding is that particularly law students started taking advantage of this because they had the highest debt, because the average debt in the 80s, 90s wasn't the kind of thing that you would declare bankruptcy over. You could handle it. For law students, they couldn't handle it, especially as the economy collapses every now and then when they're coming out of law school and can't find work. So a ton of law school students were thinking back, oh yeah, bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. And they were wiping off their debts through bankruptcy reform. And then Joe Biden was the kind of lead champion in making sure that you couldn't do that. So the reason you can't do this is Biden, basically. Do you think, though, if people could do it, do you think that that's a serious, I guess, not obviously not solution, but even a Band-Aid? I don't really think it is. It feels like too much of like a Band-Aid, and also, if you saddle a ton of debt on a 22-year-old who has no assets, and then you say, hey, if you want, you can declare bankruptcy. It's like, well, most of them are going to be like, all right, I'm going to declare bankruptcy then. And then they have 7 years of bad credit, and it's a mess. And it keeps spiraling. It would be better than the current system, but it's by no means a remotely rational way to run higher education. Well, and this is the point that I'll make. It's like,
these things, there are certain little fixes that are better than the current system, but if they enable the current system to continue spiraling worse and worse, I think in the aggregate, they're actually worse in and of themselves because it's a cope. And so having a cope, instead of actually saying, we're going to get the cost of education under control, and we're going to stop like these subsidies, we're going to fix all of the sort of fundamental problems with the system, because education is not something that should cost what it costs right now. It's insane. We're just coping, and we're coping ourselves into a death spiral, basically.
And how about this grand bargain between the left and the right? Free public college, and in exchange, we promise to cut like 70% of the administrative expenses that these colleges have like absorbed.
Do you promise?
Promise.
I feel like AOC talking to Nancy Pelosi right now.
Promise, they're gone. All of these different offices that have been built over the last 20 years. Because the problem is every time there's a protest on campus now, the administration responds by creating a new office to address whatever that protest is.
It's insane.
The office gets staff, the office gets a building, the office gets multiple six-figure administrators, and it just spirals from there.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely terrible. It's an interesting proposal, Ryan. I'm not sure about that because at the same time, I think you also, to prevent that from continuing to go up again, to see the same problem, you have to, I think, also rethink the way that we do loans, the way the government dishes out loans, even for public education.
Well, so going forward,
if it's totally free,
going forward, the protesters who successfully extract a new office of X out of an administration, they're the ones that have to pay. they get surcharged for these six-figure salaries.
That's not going to work.
No, they'll be like, you know what? Maybe let's not do another office of.
Yeah, we're not going to protest the sushi, which is an actual thing that happened in
cultural
Oberlin.
Appropriation.
Yes,
is that what it was?
Yes.
See, I'm ahead of these guys now.
Yeah, you figured it out.
Fish is not cultural appropriation. There's fish everywhere.
I thought you were talking, every time you say fish, I think you're talking about pH
the band?
fish.
There probably is
like, there's got to be something going on there. Oh, man. Well, that does it for us. Thank you for sticking through the rising Qs and all of our thoughts on these important topics.
Deep thoughts.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And Rising will be back with all of you tomorrow. And Rising Fridays will be back with you on Friday.
See you then.